Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to my buddy TJ Alexander about their book Triple Sec. Welcome, TJ.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you. It's always so wonderful to see you. We always have such a good time, and I don't think today will be any different.
I don't think so, no.
Good. So give the audience a setup about what Triple Sec is about.
Sure. Triple Sec is the story of a jaded 30-something bartender named Mel. She's divorced, living in New York, working at this very high-class cocktail bar, but, not really feeling like love and romance is going to be in the cards for her. And when suddenly this beautiful woman walks into the bar, they have an instant chemistry and attraction, mutual attraction. But it turns out that this woman is married. Boo, boo. Except we live in a world where polyamory exists.
That's right.
And all together with BB and her spouse Cade, all three of them sort of over the course of the book embark on figuring out a relationship that works amongst and between all of them. So there you have it.
That's to give you a little pat on the back. That's one of the things that you do so well, TJ. You give us a queer romance that is believable and fun, and you want to see where it goes. And we're in the car with you, and you're driving us, and you always take us on such great romantic adventures. I love it.
I love that you think I'm a good driver in this metaphor. That makes me feel very affirmed.
Good.
Yeah. It's nice to do a queer romance. It's nice just to do a queer romance in this day and age. I heard a statistic recently, only 3% of all romance novels are queer or gay in some way.
Wow.
And so it's such a small niche of this, larger world, but there's so much opportunity to do something fun and unexpected and hopefully give readers something that maybe they haven't seen before in a romance novel. So I hope that people who pick this up are, maybe curious, maybe just want to have like a fun beachy read. It welcomes all comers.
It does. And that's something, another compliment, because I just adore you. So another compliment is you write believable characters and you give us so much inclusivity, and that I think is a big thing, and it is something I'm seeing bleed out into what I would call allied books, not necessarily LGBTQ+, but I find our characters arrive in mainstream books more and more in today's world, and it makes me so happy. I know I read something recently where the chief of police was a lesbian, but at no point was that, the author just simply said she had to go home to her wife and kids. And that's where it started. And it was just the everyday norm. And that's what we all shoot for. But it's also nice to see ourselves so completely realized in a book like yours is.
Thank you. It's lovely to see that like more and more in the mainstream, if that's what you want to call it, that incidental queerness or incidental inclusivity is just like in the background or just like a brief mention, because the more and more that we are all visible, the more queer and trans and non-binary people that just like in everyday life people are encountering who are out and just living their lives, the more that it seems almost bizarre that you're like writing a book or making a TV show where none of that exists. Like it just seems to me like a real disservice if you're trying to tell a story that is based in somewhat the real world, that you're not going to try and include us folks who are part of the real world. And, I love seeing that. And I especially love seeing us be the heroes and the main characters and the heroines in all these amazing queer books that are coming out lately. There's just, compared to 10 or 15 years ago, there's just such an abundance
Yeah,
comparatively. So that's nice to see.
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's wonderful. I've been reading queer characters for 30 some years, but I will say that back 30 years ago, finding any book was a bit of a challenge. Occasionally in the larger cities, you'd have a bookstore that was much more devoted to LGBTQ works,
Mm.
but there still weren't a lot of them. You had to wait, you were waiting for Armistead Maupin to crank out another one, or Patrick Gale in England, and it was especially hard to find, I think, sapphic romance novels.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so,
And now we just have so many that are beautiful and varied. And, of course, you always want more. There's always room for
absolutely.
improvement. I'd
Absolutely.
love to see more trans books, more non-binary authors. I'd love to see more trans and non-binary authors of color, especially in the adult space. We
Yes.
are, just hungry for those stories that need to be told. Get on it, traditional publishing. Like they're they're out
Well,
there. They're like ready.
I totally agree, and some publishers, thankfully, are getting on board.
Hmm.
And I think it's slowly but surely. I think like with anything in publishing, they want to make sure they can make their coin back, and I understand. But it also means that they have to be willing to take the chance and to promote. Promotion is, I
Exactly.
think, one of the largest things that if it's like with a new TV show, if there's no promotion, it's going to die. I
I
mean,
know.
if you don't
There
know it's on television, how can you watch it?
Exactly. I'm very lucky that this book is put out by Atria, the same imprint that has put out my previous three books, and they have been, very supportive and very some authors, it's all up to them, right? It's like, well,
Yes,
learn
yes.
how to promote yourself because you're the only one who's going to be doing it. Like, thankfully, like I have someone who is like an expert in these things and is willing to work with me, because it's hard for an author to be both the author and the designer and the publicist and the marketer and all these different things. Self-publishing, I couldn't do it. And God bless all the people who can and are putting their work out there and doing all of that work. It is so admirable, I think,
I
for the
agree,
people who have those skills to do it.
and it's a double full-time job if you're doing it
Hmm.
yourself. So, and I
Absolutely.
do want to give a second little shout out to Atria. Atria is great to work with from my capacity. I enjoy the people that work at Atria, and they do seem to be very promote oriented, which is a nice thing for both a podcaster as well as an author.
Yeah, it doesn't, some publishers might, I don't know, I wouldn't know because I'm having such a lovely time with the folks at Atria. But you hear these horror stories about some publishers who are like, well, we'll put out this book just to check a box. We had one queer book come out this season, pat on the back for us. But you got to
Right.
promote this
Ooh,
stuff or else
look,
nobody
right,
hears about it.
right. We
Yeah.
have the one book for Pride. We're very
Yeah.
excited.
our, our one pride title, like, it's 2024. You can do
Right?
better. We
You
can.
can do at least two or three, right? Well, and I will say a nice thing about flying next month is we are really well represented in June. And I will say last summer, I was very pleased because I flew in June, July, and August that I saw queer books all the way through August and September. And that was a nice thing, especially like at the airport. It's
Yeah,
also nice to realize that there's a big audience out there. So if you're not selling some of everybody, you really are losing money.
absolutely. Hmm.
So, are you personally a competitive person?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I'm the kind of person who I think would like to say, "Oh no, I'm not competitive. I'm more of a cooperative person. I love working together, with people." But no, it's not true about me. I know this about myself. Board game nights, like when someone puts out a board game, I'm just like, "Oh, it's time to make enemies and lose friends." Like I think I'm pretty competitive. Yes, I comes from being raised Catholic. I think you want to earn that gold star. You want to get that A plus on your report card. Yeah, I think that that's been very helpful, I think, as an author, to feel like a sense of competition, even if it's just with yourself, just to be like,
Mhm.
okay, I want to hit a certain word count today. And, even if I'm just like playing the game against myself, like, well, yesterday I wrote this many words. Can I beat that today? Like, can I, that keeps you not just like motivated, but like it gives you like a little bit of a sense of like, I'm not just like, slogging through my first draft, like hating every minute of it. Like I'm actually getting like a little bit of a jolt of happiness from it.
I'm the same way. I love competition. I think it gets your creative juices flowing. Really, if you like, you're talking about a board game, any kind of game that you play that you can compete. It's not that I want to annihilate the other people, which I might, but
Which I
at the
might
same,
incidentally.
it's an option, right? So now I want to ask sort of a silly question, because I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to ask TJ. So in your book, you have a polyamorous relationship, and I thought, well, I would not ask a thriller writer if they do homework on how to kill someone. So I'm not sure. Am I allowed to ask you, did you have a lot of homework to do for writing a polyamorous one? So I think it's a silly question, because I really wouldn't ask, Ashley Winstead, had she killed anybody?
I mean, I don't think it's silly, especially because, polyamory is not something you would see in a traditionally published romance very often, right? I couldn't find any comps when I was first pitching the concept of this book to my editor. I couldn't find any. There are some, very cute and amazing ones that are indie books. Um, but I was like, what am I going to compare this to? And I realized, like, because there wasn't this plethora of poly titles that I could point to and say, like, oh, it's like this, or if you like this, you might like this. I was like, I'm going to have to be very strategic about how I present these characters in this relationship, because this might be a lot of readers' first brush with this concept. And it's getting a lot of press lately, the polyamorous business, I guess. The coalition is getting a lot of press lately. Not all of it, I would say, accurate. I read some of these think pieces and some of these magazines or newspapers that are, interviewing the weirdest thruple you've ever met in Park Slope and being like, and this is what I guess polyamory is like, middle America. And I was just like, I don't think that is indicative of like what most polyamorous relationships are. Not that the threesome in my book are supposed to represent every single polyamorous person in America. That's not what I'm trying to do. That's not possible. But I wanted to present a version of this kind of relationship that was not lurid or like scandalous. That was just like, these are three queer people who are living their lives, and their relationship might look a little bit different from other relationships, but it's not scary or weird or necessarily even more like dirty. I really wanted to make sure that people didn't think that this was some kind of exercise in how filthy I could make a book, although it is the steamiest book I have written to date, just
It
because
is.
numbers wise you can't help it. Statistically, it just more pages have to be dedicated to it. So yes, I did do some research just because I wanted to get a lot of different poly perspectives, right? I wanted to sort of have in mind, how do other people approach this? What are the different ways that people like get into a poly relationship or have an experience with polyamory? So I read like the classics, right? The Ethical Slut, which I think is in something like its 4,000th edition. Like I read that. I read the slightly more recent Polysecure, which is kind of like the handbook for every Manhattanite who's like, maybe we should open our relationship. you know? And I just talked to people. I talked to people who had been or were or currently are in a poly relationship, and was like, what's that like for you? How did you end up, where you ended up? Like, what's your deal? Because everyone is different. So yeah, I did end up doing a lot of research on that just because I felt that there was more pressure to get it right, if that makes any sense. And I know that that's like very silly that like, well, it's just a romance book. You shouldn't have to be approaching it like this is a textbook, like I'm not writing like an instruction manual, but I also didn't want to do a disservice to the polyamorous community who is just had so little representation period and so little positive representation.
That's
And I
right.
just wanted to make sure that I like, was really being intentional in how I made this story.
So I have a couple of comments. So you mentioned steamy. Just as I said to Taj McCoy, I sort of think this should have a little thing down here that says cigarette may be needed. So there,
Cigarette or coping mechanism of your choice.
but I love the fact that the steamy portions were so well done, and they were not gratuitous. They were very seriously done. You really, really did a great job with that, looking to give a positive experience. And I
Mm,
also think that the term open relationship makes most people, and I can say I have been in that camp at some points in my life, assume that the relationship is on the skids, which is something that
yes.
you purposefully, and I know this, purposefully made sure that your original couple are not on the skids. They just happen to have an interest in a third, which I think
Yes.
was so well done because it gives, for lack of a better term, it gives hope because it's not done as, making fun of or dirty. It's simply done as we have space in our heart for a third person.
Exactly, exactly. And then what's funny is in my earlier drafts of this story, this is a little behind the scenes peek, I
Come
guess.
on, bring it on, bring it on.
I was completely ignorant and unaware of that stereotype. This is how small my little New York bubble is. I didn't know that there were people out there who thought like, "Oh, they're in an open relationship. They must not like each other." I didn't know that that was even a thing. So when I was, first drafting this story and showing it to people, they were like, "Oh, you have to really make sure you're very clear that like that BB and Cade love each other and that they like, enjoy each other's company." And I was like, "Well, of course they do. They're married." And they were my first readers were like, no, you really have to make sure that that's obvious to the reader because otherwise they might assume that they don't like each other and that's why they're like, they have other partners and other lovers. And I was like, what? Why would they? I didn't understand. Very naive and tiny little baby of me, but like, yeah, I was like, oh, okay, because so many of the maybe like gossip or media portrayals that people have seen of these relationships are that kind of very negative, like, oh, she doesn't get along with him or he hates her, and that's why they like opened up the marriage as like a last ditch effort. And I was just like, oh, that's not fun and flirty. That's not my rom com world.
No, 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 no. So I thought you really handled that nicely because you gave us seriously an idea that three people could have room in their hearts for each other. And that I
Yeah.
think is a very important thing. So now sort of staying with Polly, but so BB has what she calls a poly social network,
Mm.
which I love because I have been a big believer in social networking my entire career. I think the last time I interviewed for a job, I was 26 years old, and I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was. That was a very long time ago,
You're
and
living the
that's been,
dream.
well, but that's my big thing about networking. So,
Mm.
thinking about TJ Alexander in your life, do you have a big networking social network? Are there people you call to say, can you look at this or read this, or am I going off the deep end or something like that?
That's so interesting because I'm the kind of person who would normally say like, "Oh no, like I live a very quiet, simple life. I keep to myself and I'm just in my office writing my little books." But then when you sit down to think about it, when you're like working on a story or you're thinking about a project and you're like, "Ooh, actually, I know this person could help me with this or this editor I know is really into books like this. I should connect them." And I just came back from this wonderful it was kidlit focused, but I got invited on like accident, I think. it was a it was a Memorial Day weekend queer camping excursion for publishing industry people,
Nice.
and it was just wonderful. It was wonderful to meet all these people that I had something in common with, and just to be like, oh, you should talk to this person that I know because I think what you're talking about they'd really be into. And you start to realize, like, oh, after like X number of years on this earth, I do know some people. I can rely on acquaintances and friends and industry fellows, gender neutral. And you just, if you're a person who likes other people and wants to like help support other people in this industry, which is a very difficult industry to work in and make a living in, then you will just hopefully naturally come into contact with other people who are like-minded, who are like, yeah, I'm also working on a queer romance, and I think we should do an event together. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense, like, why wouldn't we? And you just like start making these connections almost on accident. I used to hate the idea of networking because it seems so like, oh, you go in and everyone's drinking white wine and like, what can you do for me and what do you want me to do for you? And it feels very transactional, but it's actually not that. It's just being like friendly with people and like helping people out when they need it, which is like, that's what I was doing anyway. Like,
That should be all of humanity's dream. I mean, it shouldn't be that far out, but I totally agree with you. Sometimes if it's not done right, it can feel icky. So
right.
in triple sec, we have some delicious drink recipes, just as with
Yes.
Chef's Kiss and Chef's Choice, you have some baking recipes. So what does TJ Alexander drink?
Well, I don't drink as much these days, but when I do, my like sort of go-to is a gin and tonic. I'm a gin drinker. I don't know if it's a non-binary thing, but it's what I made my non-binary character. You are too? Okay.
Yes, I'll happily get on the wagon. Come on.
It's just the most refreshing, perfect, amazing drink I think ever invented. It's just, you can't. I've had a lot of bad ones, but it's like pizza. Even a bad one's a good one. I'll still have it. It doesn't matter
I
to me.
I totally agree with you, and I think you hit on so early on in the book you have a recipe for an old fashioned that's made a little differently, and I love
Yes.
that because I think an old fashioned is one of those holy grail drinks that some
Mm.
people will take you in the parking lot and fight with you because you didn't do it the right way. And of
Yes.
all the drink, I think an old fashioned is not an easy drink to make. It's not. I've had a lot to drink. According to the number of ingredients, it shouldn't be difficult, but I don't like mine to be too sweet. So I'm always looking
Mm.
for a bourbon that's not too sweet and not to add very much sugar water at all, because otherwise it just becomes a really sweet drink that I don't want. So,
Yeah. I'm the
but I'm
opposite. I love a sweet drink, and if something is very spirit forward, like even a great martini, I'll have like a couple sips of and be like, okay, that's as butch as I can be today. Like, I need a little fruit or a little bit of an herbal note to like get through the rest, please.
all
But
right.
funnily enough, my wife is a huge whiskey drinker, loves an old fashioned. That's her go-to cocktail. So I sort of stole BB's, spirit personality from her, because if there's an old fashioned on a menu with just like a little twist, she'll try it and then be like, but like you, too sweet, too sweet.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It's funny. Somebody posted this morning on Facebook about something. What's that one drink you've had in your life that you were like, never again? Mine was a grasshopper. I can
Oh,
tell you what that
really?
was. Oh, yes. It's been 40 years since I've had a grasshopper. No, there will not be one in my life.
They're
And I
very
like,
dangerous.
yes, they are. And I like all the ingredients in it. It's one of those that sneaks up behind you and smacks you in the head, and not in a good way. So, so
Yeah,
TJ,
I love a grasshopper though, on a hot summer day. Now that you're talking about it, I'm like, ooh, it's been like so long since I've had a grasshopper.
all right, so I'm looking to see one on your social network soon, or your social media. So
Yeah,
will you share
we'll
your
give it a try.
perfect? Will you share your website and social media with the audience?
Yes, I am at tjalexander.com for my website for all my information, all my events that are coming up, my newsletter sign up, all that's on there. I'm also on Instagram at TJ Alexander NYC, which is the same name I use on Tumblr and Blue Sky.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And also, everyone go to TJ's website and see the upcoming tour schedule for Triple Sec, which is out June 4th.
Yes, please come out to an event, or there's virtual ones as well. So
fantastic. Thank you for joining me, TJ. I appreciate it very much.
thank you, Dan. This was so nice.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.